Marcus Chen had always been told he was too small for military service, too weak for construction work, and too ordinary for anything extraordinary. Standing at 5 feet 6 inches with a lean build that seemed to disappear in crowds, he had accepted his role as a data analyst aboard the exploration vessel Meridian. While other crew members dreamed of first contact scenarios and heroic discoveries, Marcus simply ensured the ship's computers ran smoothly and the navigation system stayed calibrated. The day everything changed started like any other in the Kepler 442 system. The Meridian had been conducting routine surveys of potentially habitable worlds when their long-range sensors detected something impossible: organized electromagnetic signatures coming from the fourth planet. Not just random radio waves, but structured communications that suggested advanced civilization. Captain Rodriguez called an emergency briefing. The bridge buzzed with excitement as the crew gathered around the holographic display, showing a blue-green world with sprawling continents and vast oceans. Marcus stood at the back, tablet in hand, running probability calculations on the likelihood of hostile first contact scenarios. "The signals are definitely artificial," announced Chief Science Officer Park. "Complex mathematical progressions, prime number sequences, and what appears to be attempts at establishing communication protocols. We're looking at a technologically advanced species." The captain's weathered face creased into a grin. "Then we're making history today, people. Prepare the diplomatic shuttle. I want our best linguists and cultural specialists ready for initial contact." Marcus continued his work, cross-referencing xenological databases and preparing communication algorithms, when his tablet chimed with an urgent alert. The planet's gravity was significantly higher than Earth normal, nearly 1.8 times standard. The atmospheric composition was breathable but dense, with higher oxygen content that would affect human physiology. Most concerning of all, preliminary biological scans suggested the dominant species was remarkably large. He raised his hand tentatively. "Captain, I think we need to consider the physical implications of this contact. The environmental data suggest Chen. We'll handle the science later," Rodriguez interrupted, already moving toward the shuttle bay. "Right now we focus on making peaceful contact." 3 hours later, Marcus watched from the bridge as the diplomatic shuttle descended through the planet's atmosphere. The initial radio exchanges had gone well. The alien species, who called themselves the Valkyrie, had responded to mathematical communications and seemed eager for face-to-face contact. They had provided coordinates for what appeared to be a diplomatic facility in their largest population center. The shuttle's video feed showed a sprawling city of crystalline towers and bioluminescent gardens, architecture that seemed to grow rather than be built, with organic curves and living walls that pulsed with soft light. It was beautiful and alien in ways that made Marcus's breath catch. Then the shuttle landed, and everything went wrong. The first Valkyrie to approach the landing site stood nearly 9 feet tall, with a physique that could only be described as Amazonian. She moved with predatory grace despite her size, her skin bearing intricate bioluminescent patterns that shifted with her emotions. Her features were humanoid but refined, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. She wore what appeared to be ceremonial armor that enhanced rather than concealed her impressive form. Captain Rodriguez and the diplomatic team emerged from the shuttle, and Marcus watched their confident expressions falter as they realized they were looking up at beings who could easily overpower them. The universal translators kicked in, converting the Valkyrie's melodious language into English. "Welcome, small ones," the lead Valkyrie said, her voice carrying undertones that suggested both curiosity and mild amusement. "I am War Leader Zarathe of the 7th Dominion. Your arrival has been anticipated." The captain cleared his throat, trying to maintain diplomatic composure. "We come in peace, representing the human species of Earth. We hope to establish friendly relations between our peoples." Zarathe's luminescent patterns shifted to what the translation software identified as polite interest. "Humans, such delicate creatures. Your vessel suggests intelligence, but your physical forms suggest fragility. What could such small beings offer the Valkyrie?" Marcus found himself leaning forward, studying the interaction with growing concern. The Valkyrie weren't hostile, but there was something in their demeanor that suggested they viewed humans as interesting but ultimately insignificant, like adults humoring children at play. The diplomatic mission continued for hours, with the human team touring Valkyrie facilities and attempting to establish trade agreements and cultural exchanges. But Marcus could see the pattern emerging in the translated conversations. The Valkyrie were polite, even friendly, but they spoke to the humans the way one might speak to particularly clever pets. When the shuttle returned to the Meridian, the diplomatic team was deflated despite the technically successful first contact. They had established communication protocols and scheduled follow-up meetings, but the power dynamic was unmistakable. The Valkyrie saw humans as curiosities, not equals. "They're not hostile," Captain Rodriguez reported to the assembled crew, "but they're also not particularly impressed. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. Their physical capabilities far exceed human norms, and their society is built around concepts of strength and achievement that we simply can't match." Marcus spent the next several days analyzing every piece of data from the encounter. The Valkyrie civilization was indeed impressive. They had mastered genetic engineering, energy manipulation, and space travel technologies that made human achievements look primitive. Their society was stratified around physical and intellectual prowess, with war leaders like Zarathe at the top of complex hierarchies. But Marcus also noticed something else in the data. For all their advancement, the Valkyrie seemed to value certain qualities that humans possessed in abundance: creativity, adaptability, and emotional complexity. Their own society, while impressive, appeared rigid and predictable. He was deep in analysis when the ship's communications officer burst into his workstation. "Chen, you need to see this. We're receiving a direct transmission from the planet, and it's addressed specifically to you." Marcus's blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I wasn't even part of the diplomatic mission." But there it was on his screen, a message in perfect English, transmitted on a frequency that should have been impossible for the Valkyrie to access. The message was brief and cryptic. "Data analyst Marcus Chen of the vessel Meridian. Your computational work during the initial contact period has been observed and evaluated. War leader Zarathi of the 7th Dominion requests private audience for matters of mutual interest. This invitation is extended to you alone." The bridge fell silent as Captain Rodriguez read the message over Marcus's shoulder. Everyone knew that individual contact requests were unprecedented in first contact protocols. The implications were staggering. "Sir," Marcus said quietly, his voice steadier than he felt, "I think I'm about to become either the most important human in history or the first casualty of interspecies diplomacy." Marcus descended through the alien atmosphere in a solo shuttle, his hands trembling slightly on the controls despite his best efforts to remain calm. The captain had wanted to send an escort, but the Valkyrie message had been explicit. Marcus Chen alone, or the invitation would be withdrawn. The diplomatic team was furious, the security chief was apoplectic, and Marcus himself was terrified. The coordinates provided led him to a location far from the main city, a series of elegant structures built into the side of a mountain, overlooking a vast valley filled with bioluminescent forests. As his shuttle touched down on a landing platform that seemed to grow from the mountain itself, Marcus could see that this was clearly a private residence rather than a governmental facility. Zarathe was waiting for him as he emerged from the shuttle, but she looked different from their first encounter. Gone was the ceremonial armor, replaced by simpler clothing that somehow made her seem both more approachable and more intimidating. Her bioluminescent patterns were subdued, cycling through what his translation software identified as contemplative colors. "Marcus Chen," she said, his name sounding strange in her melodious voice. "You are smaller than I expected, even for a human." "War leader Zarathe," Marcus replied, fighting the urge to crane his neck to look up at her. "I have to admit, I'm not sure why you requested this meeting. I'm just a data analyst." Her pattern shifted to what registered as amusement. "Just a data analyst. Do you know what your just data analysis revealed during our first contact?" Marcus shook his head, genuinely puzzled. "You identified 17 potential security vulnerabilities in our communication protocols, calculated the optimal approach vectors for your shuttle based on our planetary defense patterns, and projected economic models for resource exchange that accounted for factors my own advisors had overlooked." She began walking toward the entrance of her residence, her long strides forcing Marcus to hurry to keep up. All of this while standing quietly in the background, unnoticed by your own superiors. The interior of her home was stunning. Vast spaces with living walls that responded to her presence, furniture that seemed to mold itself to accommodate her massive frame, and holographic displays showing star maps and tactical information. Marcus felt like an ant wandering through a palace built for giants. "I don't understand," Marcus said as they entered what appeared to be a study. "If you noticed all that, why not bring it up during the formal diplomatic meetings?" Zarathe settled into a chair that reconfigured itself around her, then gestured for Marcus to take a smaller seat that materialized from the floor. "Because, small one, your Captain Rodriguez and his diplomatic team were focused on impressing us with human achievements. They spoke of your art, your literature, your history of overcoming obstacles through cooperation and determination." She paused, her patterns shifting to something the translator couldn't quite interpret, but they failed to demonstrate the one thing that truly impresses the Valkyrie: the ability to see what others cannot, and act upon that vision with precision. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "You're talking about strategic thinking. I am talking about warfare, Marcus Chen. Not the crude violence your species seems to associate with the term, but the elegant art of understanding complex systems and finding the precise point where minimal effort creates maximum effect." Her eyes fixed on his, and Marcus felt like a mouse being studied by a very intelligent hawk. "Your casual analysis of our defenses was more thorough than reports prepared by military specialists from 3 different allied species." The implications of what she was saying began to dawn on Marcus. "You're not just a diplomat, are you? I am war leader of the 7th Dominion, responsible for the security of 14 star systems and 43 inhabited worlds. When an unknown species arrives at our borders, it is my responsibility to assess not just their intentions, but their capabilities." She leaned forward, her massive frame somehow managing to seem graceful rather than threatening. "And what I assessed, Marcus Chen, is that humanity has been dramatically underestimating itself." Marcus laughed nervously. "I think you're overestimating me. I'm really not that impressive by human standards. I'm considered pretty average, actually." Zarathe's bioluminescent patterns exploded into what the translator identified as genuine surprise. "Average? You consider analytical capabilities that exceed our military specialists to be average for your species?" "Well, no, but—" Marcus paused, trying to organize his thoughts. "I mean, yes, I'm good with numbers and patterns, but there are humans who are much better. Mathematicians, scientists, military strategists. I just work with computers." "Show me," Zarathe said suddenly. "Show you what?" She gestured to a complex holographic display that materialized in the air between them. "This is a tactical scenario my war college uses to train advanced strategists. 3rd-year students typically require 6 months to develop a viable solution. I am curious how long your average human mind requires." Marcus found himself looking at a 3-dimensional star map showing multiple solar systems, trade routes, and what appeared to be fleet positions for various factions. Resource indicators, time delays for communication and travel, political alliance markers, and economic data streams flowed around the display in a complex dance of information. The scenario was immediately fascinating. A trade dispute had escalated into territorial conflict, with 3 major powers positioning fleets while trying to maintain plausible deniability. Smaller nations were being forced to choose sides, refugee movements were creating humanitarian crises, and economic warfare was destabilizing entire sectors. Marcus forgot about his nervousness, forgot about the 9-foot alien watching him, forgot about everything except the beautiful complexity of the problem. His mind began organizing the information, looking for patterns, finding the hidden connections between seemingly unrelated events. "The key isn't the fleet positions," he murmured, his fingers instinctively reaching out to manipulate the holographic elements. "Everyone's focused on the military aspects, but look at the economic flows. If you disrupt this trade route here, it creates a cascade effect that forces the hegemony to withdraw their fleet to protect their core systems. And if you time it with the harvest season on these agricultural worlds..." His hands moved faster now, reorganizing the display, highlighting connections, building a solution that seemed to emerge naturally from the data itself. "You don't need to fight them at all. Create a humanitarian corridor here, offer refugee resettlement assistance there, and establish new trade agreements that make the original dispute irrelevant. The fleets become defensive assets instead of offensive threats, and everyone saves face while achieving their core objectives." Marcus finally looked up to find Zarathe staring at him with an expression that the translator couldn't begin to interpret. Her bioluminescent patterns were cycling through colors and configurations he hadn't seen before. "How long was I working on that?" he asked. 18 minutes, she said quietly. "You solved in 18 minutes what took our best students 6 months to accomplish. And your solution is elegant, minimally destructive, and accounts for factors that most strategists would never consider." Marcus felt his face flush. "I'm sure your students could do the same if they approached it from a data analysis perspective, instead of a purely military one." Zarathe stood up, her full height suddenly seeming less intimidating and more impressive in a different way. "Marcus Chen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Okay. When you look at me, what do you see?" Marcus blinked, confused by the sudden change in topic. "I see? Well, you're obviously extremely intelligent, physically impressive, clearly a leader among your people. You're beautiful in a way that's completely alien but somehow familiar, and you're asking me questions that suggest you see something in humanity that we don't see in ourselves. And does my size intimidate you?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "At first, yes, but not anymore. It's just a characteristic, like having blue eyes or being tall." Zarathe's patterns shifted to something that seemed almost vulnerable. "Among my people, I am considered small." Marcus stared at Zarathe in disbelief. "You're considered small? But you're 9 feet tall." Her bioluminescent patterns shifted to what he was beginning to recognize as melancholy. "Average height for Valkyrie females is 11 feet. Males typically reach 13 to 14 feet. I am what your species might call a runt." She turned away from him, moving to a window that looked out over the bioluminescent valley. "Among my people, physical size correlates directly with social status, political power, and reproductive desirability. I achieved my position as war leader through exceptional strategic thinking, but I remain diminished in the eyes of most Valkyrie." Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of the situation. "That's why you notice my analysis work. You understand what it's like to be underestimated because of physical characteristics." "Perhaps." Zarathe's reflection in the bioglass window made her seem almost human-sized from Marcus's perspective. "But there is more. In Valkyrie culture, strength is everything. Physical strength, intellectual strength, emotional strength. We value those who can dominate through force of will and presence. Your species approaches problems differently." "How so?" She turned back to him, and Marcus noticed that when she wasn't standing at her full height, when she was sitting or leaning against something, the size differential became less overwhelming. "You find solutions through cooperation, adaptation, and creative thinking. You work around obstacles rather than crushing them. From a Valkyrie perspective, this appears weak. But from a strategic perspective, it's actually more effective in complex situations," Marcus finished. "Brute force solutions create new problems. Elegant solutions eliminate problems entirely." "Exactly." Zarathe moved closer, settling onto a lower platform that brought her closer to Marcus's eye level. "I have been studying human tactical and strategic thinking since our first contact. Your military history is fascinating. Countless examples of smaller, weaker forces defeating larger, stronger opponents through superior strategy, better logistics, and innovative tactics." Marcus felt a flutter of pride. "We've had to get creative. We're not the biggest or strongest species on our own planet, so we learned to use our brains instead of our muscles. And yet when your diplomatic team met with us, they seemed ashamed of this. They apologized for being smaller, for being physically weaker. They tried to impress us with human achievements in art and culture, instead of demonstrating the intellectual capabilities that make humans truly formidable." The conversation was interrupted by a soft chiming sound. Zarathe's pattern shifted to irritation as she activated a communication display. A Valkyrie male appeared in holographic projection, easily 12 feet tall even in miniature, with elaborate ceremonial markings and an expression of barely concealed disdain. "War leader Zarathe," the projection said, his voice carrying overtones that the translator marked as condescension. "The Dominion Council has been informed of your private meeting with the human representative. High Commander Vextar requests immediate explanation for this breach of protocol." Zarathe's patterns flared with what Marcus's translator identified as controlled anger. "High Commander Vextar may review my official report when it is filed according to standard procedures." This meeting falls within my authority as war leader responsible for first contact security assessments. The human is physically insignificant and represents no possible threat to Valkyrie interests. What security assessment could possibly require private consultation? Marcus felt his temper flare at the casual dismissal, but before he could speak, Zarathe stood to her full height, her patterns blazing with authority. High Commander, you are addressing a war leader of the 7th Dominion. I do not require your approval for security protocols, nor do I answer to you regarding tactical assessments. End transmission. The hologram flickered out, leaving an uncomfortable silence. Marcus realized he had just witnessed a very public display of support that might have serious consequences for Zarathe standing among her own people. You shouldn't have done that, he said quietly. Not for me. I'm not worth creating problems with your superiors. Zarathe looked at him with an expression that seemed almost human in its intensity. Marcus Chen, you still do not understand what you represent. I represent a short guy with a computer science degree who accidentally impressed an alien. No. She moved closer, her voice taking on an urgency that made Marcus pay attention. You represent proof that intelligence and strategic thinking matter more than physical dominance. Every solution you provided today challenged fundamental assumptions about power and effectiveness that Valkyrie society has maintained for millennia. Marcus felt the weight of that statement. You're not just interested in human capabilities. You're interested in what human capabilities might mean for your own society. There are others among the Valkyrie who question our rigid hierarchies, who believe that wisdom should matter more than size, that strategy should outrank strength. But we have been minorities, voices easily dismissed by those who tower over us. Her patterns shifted to something Marcus couldn't identify, but it felt important. Your arrival, your demonstration of what smaller beings can accomplish, provides evidence that our perspective might be correct. So this isn't really about humans at all. It's about Valkyrie politics. It is about both. Zarathe knelt, bringing herself closer to Marcus's height, and he suddenly realized that the gesture was probably significant in a culture that valued size and dominance. Marcus, I need to tell you something that may frighten you. More than meeting a 9-foot alien warrior who could probably break me in half by accident. Her pattern shifted to what might have been amusement. Tomorrow the Dominion Council will convene to discuss the human situation. High Commander Vextar will argue that humans are too primitive and weak to warrant serious consideration for alliance or trade agreements. He will recommend that we treat your species as a curiosity, interesting to study but not worth genuine diplomatic investment. Marcus felt his heart sink. And you think he'll win that argument? I know he will, unless someone can demonstrate that human capabilities exceed Valkyrie expectations. She paused, her pattern cycling through complex configurations. The Council follows traditional protocols for such demonstrations. Combat trials, strength competitions, endurance challenges, all areas where humans cannot possibly compete with Valkyrie physiology, so we're doomed to be seen as interesting pets, not necessarily. Zarathe's pattern suddenly blazed with something that looked like determination. There is another option. An ancient protocol that has not been invoked in over 3 centuries. A trial by strategic combat. Not physical fighting, but tactical competition where intelligence and adaptability matter more than strength. Marcus felt a chill. You want me to challenge your military leadership to some kind of strategic duel? I want to invoke my right as war leader to claim you as my strategic partner and demand trial by collaborative tactical assessment. Her patterns were cycling rapidly now, betraying nervousness despite her confident words. If we succeed, it proves that human intellectual capabilities complement Valkyrie strengths in ways that traditional approaches cannot match. It establishes precedent for treating humans as equals rather than curiosities. And if we fail? Zarathe's patterns went very still. If we fail, I lose my position as war leader, and humanity loses its best chance for meaningful relationship with the Valkyrie Dominion. Marcus stared at her, trying to process the implications. You're willing to risk your entire career on the possibility that I might be smart enough to help you win some kind of alien tactical competition? No, Marcus Chen. Her voice was soft but certain. I am willing to risk everything on the certainty that human ingenuity combined with Valkyrie knowledge can solve problems that neither species could handle alone. The Dominion Council chamber was an architectural marvel that made Marcus feel like an insect attending a meeting of gods. Crystalline walls soared over 50 feet high, with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the assembled Valkyries' collective emotional state. 12 war leaders sat in elevated positions around the circular space, their impressive forms making even Zarathe look small by comparison. Marcus stood beside Zarathe at the center of the chamber, acutely aware that every eye was focused on him with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed contempt. High Commander Vextar dominated the gathering from the highest platform, his 14-foot frame draped in ceremonial armor that probably weighed more than Marcus's entire body. War Leader Zarathe, Vextar's voice boomed through the chamber. You have invoked the right of strategic partnership with this human. You claim that collaborative tactical assessment will demonstrate capabilities worthy of full diplomatic consideration. I do so claim. High Commander, Zarathe replied. Her pattern steady despite what Marcus suspected was enormous internal pressure. The Council recognizes your right to invoke this ancient protocol, another war leader interjected. However, the scenario will be selected by consensus of the assembled leaders, not by the participants. Marcus leaned closer to Zarathe and whispered, Is that normal? No, she whispered back, her patterns flickering with concern. They are stacking the odds against us. Vextar's bioluminescent markings shifted to what Marcus was learning to recognize as satisfaction. The scenario has been prepared. The Zarathe incursion, a historical tactical crisis that required the combined efforts of 4 war leaders and lasted 8 months to resolve. You will have 4 hours to develop a complete strategic solution. Marcus felt his blood run cold. 4 hours to solve a problem that had originally taken months and multiple military leaders. But as the holographic display materialized around them, showing a complex galactic scenario with multiple star systems, trade routes, and military positions, his analytical mind began to engage despite his fear. The Zarathe were a hive mind species that had suddenly exploded out of the galactic core, consuming everything in their path. Traditional Valkyrie responses, direct military confrontation, territorial defense, alliance building, had proven insufficient. The alien swarm seemed to adapt to every strategy, learning from each encounter and becoming more effective. The historical solution required massive military expenditure, the sacrifice of 4 entire star systems in a 20-year rebuilding period. Vextar announced, We will be interested to see how human ingenuity improves upon proven Valkyrie strategic doctrine. Marcus studied the scenario, letting the vast complexity wash over him. Zarathe began analyzing the military aspects, fleet positions, defensive capabilities, alliance structures, while Marcus focused on patterns and data flows. But something was bothering him about the fundamental assumptions. Zarathe, he said quietly, this historical solution, it worked, but it was essentially a war of attrition, right? Grind down the enemy until they couldn't continue? Correct. The Zarathe eventually retreated when their resource expenditure exceeded sustainable levels, but that assumes they were operating under the same strategic limitations as biological species. Marcus manipulated the holographic display, highlighting communication patterns and expansion vectors. Look at these movement patterns. They're not random, and they're not optimal for resource acquisition. There's something else driving their behavior. Zarathe's patterns shifted to interest. Explain. Hive minds don't think like individuals or even like collective societies. They think like organisms. Marcus began tracing the Zarathe expansion with his finger, showing how it followed specific patterns. This isn't conquest or resource gathering. It's something else entirely. He pulled up biological data on the Zarathe, cross-referencing it with their expansion patterns and communication frequencies. Zarathe, what if they weren't invading at all? What if they were fleeing? The war leader's patterns blazed with sudden understanding. You think something was driving them out of the galactic core. I think something was hunting them. Marcus manipulated the display to show the core regions the Zarathe had abandoned. Look at these stellar patterns. Massive gravitational anomalies. Energy signatures that don't match any known phenomena. Something was systematically destroying their home regions. Around them, the other war leaders were leaning forward, their patterns showing growing interest despite themselves. Marcus was dimly aware that he was performing in front of the most powerful military minds in the Valkyrie Dominion, but the puzzle was too fascinating to allow nervousness. If they were refugees rather than invaders, Zarathe said slowly, then military response would naturally increase their desperation and aggressive behavior. Exactly. Every time you attacked them, you confirmed their belief that this region of space was also hostile. So they fought harder, adapted faster, became more dangerous. Marcus was working furiously now, pulling together data streams and projecting alternative scenarios. But what if instead of fighting them, you offered them what they actually needed? Which was what? Sanctuary. A new home region where they could establish sustainable colonies without threatening existing civilizations. Marcus highlighted several uninhabited star systems in the Outer Rim territories. These regions have the resource profiles the Zarathi need, but they're far enough from established civilizations to provide buffer zones. Zarathe's patterns were cycling rapidly as she processed the implications. A diplomatic solution rather than a military one. Offer them what they want instead of fighting them for what we want to protect. More than that, Marcus said, his excitement growing as the solution crystallized. If the Zarathi were fleeing from something in the galactic core, then whatever drove them out might still be there. By helping them establish stable colonies, you gain allies against whatever the real threat might be. High Commander Vextar's voice cut through their discussion. This is speculation without foundation. The Zarathi were confirmed as aggressive invaders by direct military engagement. Marcus looked up at the towering Valkyrie leader. High Commander, with respect, the military engagements confirmed that the Zarathi fought when attacked. That's not the same as proving they were naturally aggressive. You would have us trust the word of alien hive minds over proven military doctrine. I would have you test the hypothesis. Marcus gestured to the holographic display. The scenario gives us access to all the original data. Let me show you what a diplomatic approach might have accomplished. Working together, Marcus and Zarathe began constructing an alternative timeline. Instead of military response to Zarathi expansion, they modeled diplomatic contact, resource negotiations, and collaborative exploration of the galactic core threat. The results were startling. Not only did the refugee approach resolve the immediate crisis faster and with minimal casualties, but it revealed evidence of a much larger threat that the military-focused response had completely missed. The gravitational anomalies in the core regions, Zarathe announced to the chamber, represent technology that could threaten the entire galactic arm. By focusing on the symptoms, Zarathi expansion instead of the cause, the historical response missed an opportunity to address the real danger. Vextar's patterns showed agitation. This is theoretical manipulation of historical data. We cannot know that diplomatic approaches would have succeeded. Actually, we can, Marcus said quietly, because 3 years after the historical resolution, the Zarathi sent peaceful diplomatic envoys to 14 different species, including the Valkyrie. They offered technological exchange, resource-sharing agreements, and mutual defense pacts. Every single overture was rejected because they were still classified as former enemies. The chamber fell silent. Marcus could see the war leaders processing this information, their patterns shifting as they realized the implications. The historical records confirm this, one of the war leaders announced after checking her data systems. Diplomatic contact attempts were dismissed as potential deception tactics. So the real question, Marcus continued, isn't whether human thinking can solve Valkyrie problems. The question is whether Valkyrie strategic doctrine has room for approaches that prioritize understanding over dominance, cooperation over conquest. Zarathe's patterns blazed with pride and satisfaction. The human approach doesn't just solve the immediate tactical problem. It identifies underlying strategic opportunities that traditional methods miss entirely. Vextar was quiet for a long moment, his massive form somehow seeming less imposing. The solution is elegant, and the implications are disturbing. If similar opportunities have been missed in other conflicts, then perhaps, Zarathe said carefully, it is time for the Valkyrie to consider that wisdom comes in many forms, and strength is not always measured in size. The aftermath of the trial brought changes that Marcus hadn't anticipated. Within days of the Dominion Council's grudging acknowledgement of their success, requests for consultation began flooding in from across Valkyrie space. War leaders who had previously dismissed humans as insignificant were suddenly eager to explore alternative strategic methodologies. Marcus found himself installed in a guest quarters, adjacent to Zarathe's residence, with access to Valkyrie databases and communication networks that revealed the true scope of their civilization. The Dominion controlled over 300 star systems, maintained diplomatic relations with dozens of alien species, and faced strategic challenges that made Earth's geopolitical complexities look simple by comparison. "You realize what you've done?" Zarathe said as they reviewed the latest consultation requests over what Marcus had learned was the Valkyrie equivalent of breakfast. The bioluminescent fruits were surprisingly delicious, though the portions were sized for beings much larger than humans. "I helped solve a tactical puzzle," Marcus replied, though he suspected the answer was more complicated. "You introduced the concept that military problems might have non-military solutions." Zarathe's patterns shifted to what he now recognized as her expression of deep thought. For 3,000 years, Valkyrie strategic doctrine has been built around the application of superior force. Bigger fleets, stronger weapons, more intimidating presence. You demonstrated that understanding the underlying motivations of opponents might be more effective than simply overpowering them. Marcus paused in his attempt to consume a fruit that was approximately the size of his head. "That seems like a pretty basic concept for an advanced civilization. Basic to humans, perhaps. Your species evolved as social problem solvers. You had to negotiate with each other, understand motivations, find compromises that allowed weaker individuals to coexist with stronger ones." She gestured around her residence, with its impossibly tall ceilings and massive furnishings. Valkyrie evolved as apex predators on a world where size and strength determined survival. Cooperation existed, but it was based on hierarchies of dominance rather than mutual benefit. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication alert. The holographic display showed the face of war leader Kyresh, one of the younger members of the Dominion Council, who had seemed most interested in their strategic demonstration. "War leader Zarathe, strategic consultant Marcus," Kyresh said, using the formal title that had apparently been created specifically for Marcus. "We have a developing situation that requires immediate attention. The hegemony of Torval has made territorial demands that threaten 3 of our border systems." Zarathe's pattern shifted to alert status. "Traditional military response?" "High Commander Vextar has ordered fleet mobilization and defensive preparations. However, several council members have requested alternative strategic assessment before committing to military action." Marcus felt a familiar flutter of anxiety mixed with excitement. "What kind of territorial demands?" Kyresh transmitted a detailed tactical briefing that materialized around them in 3-dimensional complexity. The hegemony of Torval was a militaristic alliance of several species that had been expanding aggressively for the past century. Their latest demand involved 3 star systems that sat at the junction of several major trade routes, strategically valuable but not heavily populated. Standard Valkyrie response would be immediate military deployment, Zarathe explained to Marcus. Overwhelming show of force, followed by negotiations from a position of strength. Marcus studied the data, noting patterns that seemed familiar from his earlier analysis work. The Torval expansion has been consistent and methodical, but look at the timing. Every territorial acquisition has coincided with specific economic cycles in their home systems. Explain. They're not expanding for conquest. They're expanding for economic survival. Marcus highlighted resource flow data and trade dependencies. The hegemony's core worlds are running out of specific rare materials needed for their technology base. They need these trade route control points to secure access to alternative supply sources. Zarathe's pattern shifted to recognition, so military resistance would force them into a desperate situation where they have no choice but to fight. Exactly. But if you understand their actual needs, Marcus began modeling alternative scenarios. What if instead of fighting for control of the trade routes, you offered them guaranteed access to the materials they need through different channels? The solution that emerged was elegant in its simplicity. The Valkyrie controlled mining operations in several systems that produced the materials the hegemony needed. But current trade agreements made those resources prohibitively expensive for the Torval Alliance. By restructuring trade relationships and offering long-term supply contracts, the Valkyrie could eliminate the hegemony's motivation for territorial expansion while actually increasing their own economic benefits. The profit margins on direct trade agreements would exceed the economic value of maintaining military positions in those border systems. Marcus concluded, everyone gets what they actually want instead of fighting over strategic positions that nobody really needs. Kairesh's patterns were cycling through what Marcus had learned indicated excitement and approval. This approach could be implemented immediately, before military mobilization creates hostile momentum. I'll need to present this to the full council, Zarathe said. Kairesh, can you provide political context? Which war leaders are most likely to support negotiated solutions over military responses? As they spent the next several hours developing a comprehensive proposal, Marcus began to understand that he wasn't just solving tactical problems. He was helping to reshape the fundamental approach of one of the galaxy's most powerful military civilizations. The implications were staggering. Zarathe, he said during a brief break in their planning session, what happens to humans in all this? Are we going to become permanent strategic consultants for the Valkyrie Dominion? Her patterns went very still, and Marcus realized he had touched on something she had been thinking about but hadn't discussed. That depends on several factors. Official diplomatic relations between our species will need to be negotiated. Cultural exchange programs will need to be established and you will need to decide whether you want to return to your ship or remain here to continue this work. Marcus felt an unexpected pang at the thought of leaving. Over the past few weeks, he had found himself looking forward to his daily collaborative sessions with Zarathe, enjoying the intellectual challenges of Valkyrie strategic problems, and feeling more useful than he had ever felt in his life. What would I be returning to? He asked quietly. My job on the Meridian was routine computer maintenance and data analysis. Important work, but not exactly fulfilling. Here, I'm helping prevent interstellar wars and reshape galactic diplomacy. And here, Zarathe said, her voice carrying undertones that the translator couldn't quite interpret. You are appreciated for your intellectual contributions rather than dismissed because of your physical characteristics. Something in her tone made Marcus look at her more carefully. Her bioluminescent patterns were cycling through configurations he didn't recognize, and she seemed to be avoiding direct eye contact. Zarathe, is there something you're not telling me? Her patterns flared bright, then settled into what he had learned was her expression of determination mixed with vulnerability. Marcus, among the Valkyrie strategic partnerships that prove successful over time, often develop into deeper associations, personal bonds, emotional connections, what humans might call romantic relationships, though Valkyrie courtship traditions are significantly different from human practices. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. Are you saying? I am saying that working with you has been the most intellectually stimulating and personally satisfying experience of my career. I am saying that your approach to problem-solving complements my strategic training in ways I had not thought possible. And I am saying that the thought of you returning to your ship while I remain here is unpleasant. Marcus stared at her, trying to process what she was telling him. Zarathe, you're 9 feet tall, incredibly beautiful, one of the most powerful military leaders in the galaxy, and you're interested in a 5'6" human computer technician? Her patterns shifted to what might have been amusement. Marcus, you are brilliant, insightful, brave enough to challenge civilizations far more powerful than your own. And you treat me as an intellectual equal, rather than either a curiosity or a threat. From my perspective, the question is whether you would be interested in a too small Valkyrie, who risks her career on theoretical strategic partnerships. Before Marcus could answer, the communication system chimed with an urgent alert. The display showed Captain Rodriguez from the Meridian, and his expression was grim. Marcus, we've been monitoring the situation with the Valkyrie, and Earth Command has some concerns about the developing relationship. They're ordering you to return to the ship immediately for debriefing and possible recall to Earth. Marcus felt his world shift beneath him as Captain Rodriguez's words sank in. Earth Command wanted him back, which meant leaving behind everything he had discovered about himself, about the Valkyrie, and about the incredible work he and Zarathe had been accomplishing together. Captain, Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I understand Earth Command's concerns, but the strategic partnerships we've developed here are preventing multiple military conflicts. The Valkyrie are beginning to embrace diplomatic solutions over military ones because of the collaborative work we've demonstrated. Rodriguez's expression was sympathetic but firm. Marcus, I know you've been doing important work, but Earth Command is worried about one human having so much influence on alien policy decisions. They want you debriefed, your methods analyzed, and a proper diplomatic team assigned to continue the relationship. Zarathe, who had been listening to the conversation, stepped forward so that she was visible on the communication display. Captain Rodriguez, if I may address Earth Command's concerns directly? The captain's eyes widened as he took in Zarathe's impressive presence. War Leader Zarathe, of course, though I should mention that my superiors are particularly concerned about the personal nature of the relationship that seems to have developed. Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. Sir, the relationship is professional. We're working as strategic partners on complex diplomatic problems. Marcus, Rodriguez said gently, you've been living adjacent to her personal residence for 3 weeks. You're eating meals together, spending 18 hours a day in each other's company, and according to our monitoring of Valkyrie communications, there's considerable speculation about whether you two are developing romantic involvement. Zarathe's bioluminescent patterns flared with what Marcus recognized as controlled anger. Captain, human monitoring of private Valkyrie communications represents a significant breach of diplomatic protocol. More importantly, the personal relationship between strategic consultant Marcus and myself has enhanced rather than compromised our professional effectiveness. That may be true, War Leader, but Earth Command's position is that personal relationships between humans and aliens should be approached with extreme caution. They want Marcus back for evaluation and policy development. Marcus felt a surge of frustration that surprised him with its intensity. Captain, with respect, I'm not Earth Command's property. I'm a civilian contractor who was assigned to this mission. If they want to develop policies about human-alien relationships, they can do that without using me as a test case. Marcus, Rodriguez began, but Zarathe interrupted. Captain Rodriguez, perhaps you should inform Earth Command that the Valkyrie Dominion is prepared to offer strategic consultant Marcus formal diplomatic status, along with all the protections and privileges that such status entails. His work here has prevented 3 potential military conflicts in the past 2 weeks alone. Removing him at this crucial juncture would be inadvisable. The captain's expression shifted from sympathetic to concerned. War Leader, that sounds very much like a threat. It is not a threat, Captain. It is information. The Valkyrie Dominion values Marcus's contributions highly enough to offer him permanent residency and full citizenship if he chooses to accept. We would naturally prefer to maintain positive relations with Earth, but we will not allow politics to interfere with strategic partnerships that benefit galactic stability. Marcus stared at Zarathe in shock. You're offering me citizenship? Her patterns shifted to something he couldn't quite interpret. The offer was approved by the Dominion Council yesterday. Your strategic contributions have been deemed valuable enough to warrant full integration into Valkyrie society, with all accompanying rights and privileges. What does that mean exactly? It means, Zarathe said carefully, that you would have legal standing to own property, enter into contracts, participate in governmental functions, and form personal relationships according to Valkyrie law rather than human regulations. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward on the display. Marcus, you need to think very carefully about this. Once you accept alien citizenship, Earth's ability to provide protection or support becomes extremely limited. You'd be committing to life in alien society with no guarantee of being able to return home. Marcus looked around Zarathe's residence, thinking about the work they had been doing, the intellectual challenges, the sense of purpose and accomplishment he had never experienced on Earth. Then he looked at Zarathe herself, whose patterns were cycling through configurations that suggested anxiety and hope in equal measure. Captain, can you give me 24 hours to consider the decision? Of course. But Marcus, remember that whatever choice you make will affect not just your life, but the future of human-Valkyrie relations. Earth Command will be watching how this situation resolves. After the communication ended, Marcus and Zarathe sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Marcus spoke. You offered me citizenship without discussing it with me first. I did. Her patterns showed no apology. The offer was strategic. Earth Command cannot recall a Valkyrie citizen without creating a diplomatic incident. So this is about politics, not about our personal relationship. Zarathay's patterns flared with something that might have been hurt. Marcus, everything we do has political implications. That does not mean our motivations are purely political. Then what are your motivations? She was quiet for a long moment, her massive form somehow seeming vulnerable. My motivations are that working with you has made me happier and more effective than I have ever been. My motivations are that the thought of you leaving feels like losing a part of myself that I had not realized was missing. My motivations are that I believe we accomplished together what neither of us could achieve alone. Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate. Zarathay, if I accept citizenship, if I stay here, what exactly would our relationship be? That would depend on what you want it to be. Her patterns shifted to something almost shy. Valkyrie courtship traditions involve lengthy periods of intellectual and emotional compatibility assessment. Strategic partnerships that develop into romantic relationships typically progress through formal stages of increasing commitment and intimacy. And you would want that? With me? Marcus, in Valkyrie society I have always been too small. Too focused on intellectual rather than physical prowess. Too interested in unconventional approaches to be considered truly desirable as a romantic partner. With you, I feel valued for exactly the qualities that make me different from other Valkyrie. Marcus stood up and moved to the window overlooking the bioluminescent valley. The alien landscape was beautiful, peaceful, and completely unlike anything on Earth. If I stay, I can never really go home again. No, Zarathay said quietly. But perhaps you could build a new home. With you. If that is what you choose. Marcus thought about his life on Earth. His routine job. His small apartment, his few casual friendships, his complete lack of romantic relationships. Then he thought about the past few weeks, the intellectual excitement, the sense of purpose, the feeling of being valued and appreciated for his unique contributions. And he thought about Zarathay, brilliant, powerful, beautiful in her alien way, and apparently interested in building a life with him, despite the vast differences in their backgrounds and biology. Zarathay, if I accept citizenship, if we pursue this relationship, what happens when the novelty wears off? What happens when you realize that I'm just an ordinary human who got lucky with a few strategic insights? Her patterns blazed with intensity. Marcus, what happens when you realize that I am just an undersized Valkyrie who has built her entire career on being different from her own people? Then I guess we figure it out together. Zarathay's patterns shifted to something that looked like joy mixed with relief. Is that your answer? Marcus looked out at the alien valley, then back at the most extraordinary being he had ever met. My answer is that I'd like to accept Valkyrie citizenship, continue our strategic partnership, and see where our personal relationship develops. But I need to do something first. What? I need to contact Captain Rodriguez and make sure Earth understands that this isn't about rejection or politics. It's about choosing a life where I can make the greatest contribution and find personal happiness. And if Earth Command refuses to accept that explanation, Marcus smiled, feeling more confident than he had in years. Then Earth Command is going to learn the same lesson that High Commander Vextar learned. Sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected sources, and wisdom doesn't always come in the package you expect. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the Dominion Council chamber once again, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. Instead of facing skeptical war leaders who viewed him as a curiosity, he was presenting the quarterly strategic assessment report as an officially recognized Valkyrie, citizen and strategic consultant to the Dominion. The bioluminescent patterns of the assembled war leaders showed satisfaction and approval as Marcus concluded his presentation on the successful resolution of the hegemony crisis and 3 subsequent diplomatic initiatives that had prevented military conflicts while strengthening the Dominion's economic position. The integration of human analytical methodologies with traditional Valkyrie strategic doctrine has exceeded all projections, announced war leader Kairesh, who had become one of Marcus's strongest supporters. Resource expenditure on military operations has decreased by 40%, while territorial security has actually improved. High Commander Vextar, who had initially been Marcus's most vocal opponent, nodded grudgingly. The results speak for themselves. However, I remain concerned about the precedent of non-Valkyrie citizens holding positions of strategic influence. High Commander, Zarathay replied smoothly. Strategic consultant Marcus has undergone the same qualification assessments as any Valkyrie citizen seeking similar positions. His performance metrics exceed requirements in all categories. Marcus smiled privately at the exchange. The relationship between Zarathe and Vextar had evolved into something resembling mutual respect, though the High Commander still clearly found the entire situation unusual. The integration process had been challenging for everyone involved, but the results had ultimately convinced even the most traditional council members. After the formal session ended, Marcus and Zarathe walked together through the corridors of the Dominion complex toward their shared residence. The transition from separate living spaces to a joint household had been one of many adjustments over the past months, but Marcus had found the Valkyrie approach to relationship development surprisingly thoughtful and methodical. Earth Command finally sent their response to our latest diplomatic proposals. Zarathe mentioned as they entered their home. Marcus felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Relations with Earth had been complicated since his decision to accept Valkyrie citizenship. While Captain Rodriguez and the crew of the Meridian had been supportive, Earth Command had initially viewed his choice as something between desertion and treason. What's the verdict? They're accepting the proposed cultural exchange program. 12 human strategic analysts will be assigned to work with Valkyrie war leaders over the next year, while an equivalent number of Valkyrie will join human military and diplomatic institutions. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. So they're finally acknowledging that cooperation might be more valuable than suspicion. It appears that the economic benefits of our collaborative successes have overcome their concerns about human-alien relationships. Zarathe's patterns shifted to amusement. Your former Captain Rodriguez will be leading the human delegation. Rodriguez? That's excellent news. He'll be perfect for bridging the cultural gaps. They settled into their evening routine, which had become a comfortable blend of human and Valkyrie customs. Marcus had adapted to the larger scale of Valkyrie furniture and architecture, while Zarathe had adjusted her daily schedule to accommodate human sleep patterns and meal preferences. Marcus, Zarathe said as they reviewed the next day's project assignments, there is something we need to discuss. Her tone carried undertones that Marcus had learned to recognize as indicating an important conversation. What's on your mind? The Council has approved funding for the Strategic Analysis Institute that we proposed. The facility will be constructed according to specifications that accommodate both human and Valkyrie physiologies, with research teams composed of multiple species. Marcus felt excitement building. The Institute had been their most ambitious project, a research facility dedicated to developing new approaches to interspecies diplomacy and conflict resolution. That's incredible news. When do we start construction? Construction begins immediately. However, the Council has also made a formal request. Zarathe's patterns shifted to something that might have been nervousness. They want us to serve as the Institute's co-directors with full authority over research priorities and staff selection. Us? Together? Together. As a permanent partnership. Her patterns were cycling through complex configurations that Marcus was still learning to interpret. The position would formalize our professional collaboration and provide the resources to expand our work across the entire galactic sector. Marcus realized that she was offering him something far beyond what he had ever imagined when he first descended to the Valkyrie planet. Not just a job or a research position, but a career that would allow him to help shape interspecies relations throughout their region of the galaxy. Zarathe, are you asking me to commit to building this institute with you? I am asking if you want to spend your life working to prove that different species can accomplish more together than they ever could apart. Her voice carried intensities that made Marcus's heart race. I am asking if you want to build something permanent and important with someone who values your contributions and cares about your happiness. Marcus looked around their shared home, thinking about the path that had brought him here. Less than a year ago, he had been a minor functionary on a human exploration vessel, overlooked and undervalued. Now he was a citizen of one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, working on projects that affected the lives of billions of beings across dozens of star systems. More importantly, he was sharing that life with someone who challenged him intellectually, supported him professionally, and had somehow fallen in love with him despite the vast differences in their backgrounds and biology. Zarathe, he said, reaching over to touch her massive hand with his much smaller one. I think the real question is whether you're ready to spend your life with someone who will Probably always be asking uncomfortable questions and suggesting unconventional solutions to traditional problems. Her bioluminescent patterns blazed with joy. Marcus, I have built my entire career on asking uncomfortable questions and suggesting unconventional solutions. The difference is that now I have someone who understands why those questions matter and who can help me find answers that actually work. Then yes, Marcus said, feeling more certain than he had about anything in his life. Let's build an institute. Let's change how species interact with each other. Let's prove that the best solutions come from combining different perspectives and capabilities. And let's do it together, Zarathe added. Her pattern settling into configurations that Marcus had learned meant contentment and determination. As they began planning their future work, Marcus reflected on the irony of his situation. He had started as an ordinary human who felt too small and insignificant to matter. Now he was planning to spend his life with someone who had always felt too small by her own species' standards, working together to prove that size and strength were less important than intelligence, creativity, and the willingness to see possibilities that others missed. The galaxy was full of species that measured worth by traditional standards of power and dominance. But Marcus and Zarathe were building something different, a partnership that proved that the most extraordinary achievements came from combining different strengths, rather than competing over superficial measures of superiority. Outside their window, the bioluminescent valley glowed with alien beauty, and Marcus realized that he had found something he had never even known he was looking for. A place where being different was valued rather than dismissed, where his contributions mattered and where he could build a life with someone who saw him not as he had always seen himself, but as he had the potential to become. The small human had indeed claimed an Amazon, but more importantly, he had discovered that the heart was the one place where size truly didn't matter at all.